I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, and this is Prescription for Your Transformation: Real People, Real Conversations, and Real Success. And it's always been about tapping into that authentic genius within us. But there's also an intelligence that we have to tap into. As I call it, the brain intelligence, the body intelligence, and then the energy intelligence. But the question that we have to ask ourselves, where do we find that intelligence? How is it that we can understand what that intelligence is? And what are the specifics? And that's the whole purpose of this platform, is talking to real people, having real conversations that lead to real success. And this is going to be probably one of my most exciting interviews with Tim Corcoran, because he really is able to tap into the essentials, the fundamentals of how we live in our lives today. And these are the things that we actually very much take for granted. We're so busy in our lives, and we're so busy on the external experience that we have, that we really forget what's totally inside of us. And there's that sense of confusion as to, okay, what is it that we need to really connect to when all the answers are right in front of us? And that's what Tim does in the most phenomenal way. He really brings us back to the basics. And if that's scary for you, well, I'm excited, because that's where the real transformation happens. And so in this very short series that we're going to be doing with Tim, it's all about the awakening. But it's an awakening with very specific items that you're going to want to be awoken to. And so for today, and this is the crux of it all, is awakening to wholeness. So Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. I had this amazing experience with you a couple of weeks ago in Sedona. Did this, soul wandering, which I'm excited for you to also share with people, so that people can get the kind of experiences and transformations that I had, because guess what? We all deserve it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Bart. I'm so excited to be here and really appreciate this opportunity.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about this whole idea of awakening to wholeness. I mean, this whole idea of awakening, that's, I think, in today's world, a little abused and misused. And the whole sense of wholeness is also kind of confusing for most people. And so I'd love to hear your perspective as to what that really is all about, and how we actually get connected with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. So, yeah, awakening to wholeness. I mean, I just as a little background context, right? As I look out into the world today, and I'm sure most of our listeners are probably right here with me, I have concerns about the state of our world. I have concerns about the state of our families, about our communities, of the state of our psyches, the state of the natural world. And I believe we as human beings have a responsibility to better ourselves, to evolve, to transform, so that we can be, yes, better individuals, but experience greater levels of service to really give to the world and leave this world a better place for our children and future generations, right? And so, yes, I really look at it with three primary awakenings. And for this, we're talking about our awakening to our wholeness. And what I mean by that, let's think of the word healing, right? So I'm a bit of a word nerd. So if we look in the etymology of healing, what does that mean? That means to make whole again, right? And so what I'm talking about is the journey of what some might call emotional maturity, right? Certainly for us as men, I work with a lot with women and men, but certainly for us as men here in the mainstream Western world, there's a big journey in front of us right now to claim our masculine emotional maturity, right? Noticing that yes, we do have emotions.
Yeah.
We're not just these stoic guys, who don't feel. Yes, we have emotions. I can be aware of those. I can accept those, the ones that are comfortable, the ones that are not, and I can find meaningful, generative ways to express those emotions in the world. So this looks like addressing our trauma from the past. This looks like learning to be a better partner in our relationships, whether that's primary relationships, romantic, parenting, community level, whatnot. And generally speaking, developing ourselves and our personalities into the best possible version of who we can be. And so again, I really like this notion of holing. Some people would contrast holing versus healing. Now, really, again, with the etymology, maybe we're talking about the same thing, but I really like the notion of holing, that there is a journey to remembering and reclaiming that wholeness.
I like what you shared just now because it's that sense of finding that wholeness within us so that we can
Hmm.
actually find that peace and harmony within us as well. And ultimately, that's what I believe that we all desire. We all desire this, what's called divine happiness. But the only way to
Yes,
get there is to actually remove whatever makes you unhappy. And so that's exactly what you're saying. It's the process of finding that wholeness, healing the traumas, because trauma is absolutely inevitable in life. I mean,
yes,
just think of a 3-month-old baby that's in their crib and they're hungry and nobody's responding to that baby. That's traumatic. And that,
absolutely,
that carries throughout life. And so,
absolutely.
so what are some of the ways that you actually help guide people? Because I see you as a guide. I see you as
Hmm.
an incredible guide with the kind of work that you do, especially in helping people get connected with themselves into nature as well.
Yes.
And so, how is it that you do this phenomenal guiding for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it comes about in a few different ways. Sometimes there's this quote I like to work with, Bart, and this is from Michael Beckworth, I believe. And the quote is, "The pain pushes you until the vision pulls you." And what he means by that is, in this journey of awakening to ourselves, to our place on this earth, most people, and this is not a perfect model, but I think it holds for a lot of the case. For most people, when we awaken, part of a significant part of that initial awakening is awakening to what's not working. Gosh, I've got pain and suffering in my relationships. Wow, I know that I'm so much more capable, and I sense that I'm so much more capable of serving the world. Yet that's not happening in my life. There's this sense of like feeling trapped in a job or relationships that aren't fulfilling. Sometimes there's this sense of there's a bigger world, there's a bigger level of consciousness that's possible, and I can just kind of hear the whispers of it, but it's not quite there. But I think the two big ways that the journey begins is this sense of pain, right, in our life that we want to address and take consciously, and this willingness to say, I'm not the victim here. It's not your fault or her fault or his fault. I'm the common denominator. I have an opportunity to make real change inside myself, and I'm going to take that journey. The other primary way that it shows up is when people take on what I might call the visionary development journey, or the journey of claiming our purpose in life. And then as we're going to craft that, to create that in the world, blocks come up, right? We find ourselves procrastinating or full of anxiety, or any number of things that can come up that seem to be holding us back. So in all of those cases, there's reasons those things happen, right? And I think one of the big ones, yeah, absolutely, is trauma in that's typically experienced in childhood, and we develop a set of survival mechanisms, and the psyche develops ways to stay safe and protect ourselves, but it typically keeps us small, right? Anytime I and so the healing work, of course, is to address that, to do some deep work, look in to what's happening there deep in the psyche, and address those things. I mean, as a personal example, anytime I take my next step on my path, right? We were just mentioning a retreat we were at together down in Sedona, Arizona. It was a couple hundred people, and that was a new edge for me, right? I hadn't personally held that kind of space before with that large of a group. So guess what? All my old stuff came up. All the old voices of, oh, Tim, you're not going to be good enough. They're not going to like you. They're going to, all of this, that, and the other, right? And what's really going on there? Well, for me, and again, just using myself as an example, there's a vulnerability that gets triggered inside. And if I'm not conscious of it, then all those voices, those protective voices that would keep me small, are functioning to protect that vulnerability. Look, it's scary to put yourself out there. That's true for anyone.
Right.
And so when we can admit that and say, so if we're not admitting that, then those voices of resistance come in and will function to hold us back. And we've all probably experienced that. I certainly have, where where it does actually, hold you back and certainly has prevented me at times from expressing my full self. But the work then is to look within and acknowledge, right, I'm afraid, I'm scared, this is a big deal for me, and not judge it, not need to fix it, just be with it. And then with courage to maybe find a few people, trusted individuals who can hold space, be there for you. And from that place, find that self-love, that can hold that vulnerability for me, and it's from there that I can bring that core need, that I can meet the essence of what that core part of me needs, and it relaxes, and I'm able to step forward and offer myself. Now, that's a very quick description of the journey, and frankly, there's a lot of deep work in there. If someone's dealing with issues of significant trauma, it doesn't go that fast. Some time is needed to pause and really look into that and have a healing release and a whole process of coming back to wholeness,
Right.
and redemption. That's, frankly, when I support people with that work, that's some of the work that is most meaningful. And honestly, Bart, that I am just most honored to do. When that level of vulnerability comes up, it's such an honor. And I can only say that because I've gone through it, right? I faced my abuse and my trauma and the bullying and parents' divorce, in the first 15 years of my life. And that wasn't easy. It had a big hit on my self-esteem. It was really tough. And it took some years, right? It took some years for me to really come to process that, come to terms with that, accept that, find that courage to express that vulnerability. But in the end, whatever difficulty, whatever uncomfortability that I had to face to deal with that, to address those things, was much less than the pain of, and this is a tool I often use, of imagining myself at the end of my life, not having addressed those things, knowing that those things had held me back and prevented me from really fully expressing myself in the world. I don't think I could live with myself had I not, taken this journey. So in that way, and I'll pause here in just a sec, but I'll just, to cap this, in that way, this is the idea of the sacred wound becoming the sacred gift, right? That I can realize, wow, those processes, as uncomfortable or challenging or unfortunate as they were, truly gave me an opportunity to be more conscious, to be more sensitive, to come back, to take, how would I know the light of day if it were not for the dark of night? How would I know the joy of vision and purpose if it were not for the pain of trauma and suffering? And so we really see that these are two sides of the same coin. And that's a mature perspective. If someone had told me that 15 years ago, I'd have been like, to heck with you. Like there was nothing good that could come out of those experiences. But as the years go on and the journey continues, time after time, I see, with myself or the clients and friends that I work with, coming to that mature recognition.
There's so much I could, tie into with all those beautiful things that you just shared with me. And I'm going to try to do my best right now to begin with that. And I can see that we're going to be talking a lot more in the future anyhow. But what I got from this as well, two things which I think is important, is that the tremendous amount of work that you've already done and sought out these tremendous guides, which I want to talk about, before we end this part, because I think that's very, very relevant, is tapping into the ancient wisdoms, of our ancestors, but also the ancient wisdom of Earth, and appreciating that. But what I love, what you just shared, and I want to give it some context so those listening, is that traditionally psychology, psychiatrists, they focus just what's in the brain, and you're bringing what I would say a holistic experiential transformation, where you've created a container for people to find themselves the safety that they need so that they can address the obstacles. And I'm just going to use that term, loosely, the
Right.
obstacles
Yeah.
that are preventing them from moving forward.
Yes.
And all these obstacles, I mean, they're within ourselves, created in very different ways, but they're still obstacles. And I forget who said it, but there's a great book out there, The Obstacle is the Way. And so it's
Yes.
almost like that you're creating these obstacles for us in a safe container, in an experiential one. But there's a really important element which I also experienced, with you, is being able to, number one, be witnessed
Hmm.
by others, and recognizing, whoa, I'm still alive. I just went through that vulnerability and I'm still alive. And guess what? I'm okay. And whoa, I feel really good. Number
That's right.
one, you realize that you're not alone. But more importantly, you see and experience other people's struggles also as guides as to what it is that you can then do. And
Right.
and the particular experience that I had, with your soul wandering is exactly what you just shared just a moment ago.
Yeah.
And I came out with this one statement for myself,
Mm.
and that was, go big or go home. And it's exactly what you
Yes.
said. And so
Yeah.
for me, that was powerful. And after that personal realization, which I've always known was there, um, not necessarily resolving all the obstacles that
Hmm.
limited me, but now making conscious decisions. Say, okay, great. You know what? We are going to go big, and you've delayed this long enough. I've been holding off on certain things for 20 years for
Yeah.
a lot of great excuses, right?
Oh yeah. Oh,
But
oh yeah. Of course. Of course.
today's the time, and that's what's beautiful about what you get through that. What you do best in giving us that container. So as we're wrapping up, and our next series, we're actually going to be talking about awakening of the soul and the ecological awakening,
Yes.
and that last one I'm particularly excited about. But how do people find you, and what kind of programs do you actually have?
Yeah. 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 And if I can, let me just squeeze in one or two more quick thoughts here. So,
Absolutely.
to your point, Bart, resistance is not in the way, resistance is the way,
Hmm.
right? That's a really important bit of wisdom I'd offer our listeners, that when you come up against that resistance, those blocks, those obstacles, it's not the problem that you've got to get rid of. It is your opportunity for growth. And then just to very briefly say that when one is on a journey of discovering one's purpose, one's vision, and there are known pathways to do that, that's a big part of my work, that becomes significant fuel for the journey of holing. So really, I can't really talk about the journey of holing without talking about purpose. And then again, very briefly, to just mention that when one is taking both of these journeys in a context of connection to the natural world and experiencing ourselves as nature, which is a big part of what I do, that there's a synergy, right? And that's really my life's work. So that combination of holing, discovering purpose, and connecting to nature. And yeah, I encourage people to check out our other two interviews. But yes, if people are interested, you can find me at Purpose Mountain, and online that's just www.purposemountain.com. I've got a free download on there, it's like a 40-page or so workbook that gives people just a taste of my work. And then there's various offerings I do online, coaching, one-on-one work, and group work as well. So yeah, and if folks are interested, take courage. If you're feeling drawn, if this awakens and resonates something in you, take courage, take that first step. In my experience, that's always the hardest one. And there's people who care and who can support you out there. So yeah.
So let's talk about awakening of the soul. So
Yeah.
explain to me what your perspective is, what your insight is, and but I also want to have you help us appreciate some of the deep work that you've done over the years, and where some of this ancient wisdom or guidance was
Yeah.
derived from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me start by just defining soul. And that may be an impossible task. I may be attempting to define a paradox here. And frankly, I think I am. I think there is ultimately no definition of soul that is sufficient. And yet, it's important that we attempt to, right? So I would look at soul as one's deepest essence, right? Or one's truest nature. I look at soul as from an ecological perspective, most people would think of it as a spiritual thing, Bart, but I look at it ecologically that our soul is to embody our soul means to embody our niche in the great web of life, or to truly occupy our place in this great interconnected web of life, right? When one is identified with their soul as opposed to the ego, right? Then that's when we experience our purpose, experience our great potential, our gifts, our ability to truly serve and make a difference in the human world and the more than human world, right? So I encourage folks to think about soul not as an aspect of self, but in a realm all the way unto itself. Like soul belongs to us as much as it belongs to the world,
Mhm.
right? So yes, it's my deepest essence, but it's also my point of interconnection with all things. And so again, this is where we it starts to feel a bit paradoxical, but hopefully that's enough to start giving people a sense of what I'm referring to. And so to so the journey of claiming our soul is the journey of discovering and living our purpose, or discovering and living our vision. And just to flesh that out in my own life, and start to answer this other question you've got. So I'm 46, right? And I grew up in the 80s. And, I remember in after college, what, 22 years old. I'd followed all the rules, got good grades, the whole thing. And frankly, I was just kind of just completely at odds with the modern experience. It was what, 1996. As I looked at my own life, I looked at my family. My parents had gotten divorced. I'd experienced a lot of bullying and some abuse earlier in life. And I said, this American dream, this is a crock. It is not addressing our deepest needs as human beings. And I know there is something more. I didn't know what, but I knew there was more. And I'd always had a passion for nature and a passion for indigenous peoples. And so when I graduated college, I still remember this. The day the very next day, I packed up everything I owned and put it in my, the back of my Ford pickup truck, drove 40 hours from Indiana, where I grew up, to Arizona, where I had one friend on the Navajo Indian reservation. And I said, I'm going to make a life for myself here. Now, it was a crazy thing to do, right? I had never even heard of anyone doing this. And yet, this was the call. There was some level of connection, right? There was a synchronicity in that I had all this passion for indigenous communities. And then I had met this friend who was, she was a teacher on the Navajo reservation. And that term synchronicity, right? Carl Jung brought that to us, this idea that there are two seemingly unrelated events that have a mysterious connection. And this isn't something that can be quantified or proved by science. And yet, what we find is, for those individuals who take the journey of connecting to soul, synchronicities abound. And so I really read synchronicities as a positive affirmation that one is on one's soul path. So as my own soul path began to unfold at that point in my life, Bart, um, I found myself out there. And for years, excuse me, I, I was really, maybe not even fully conscious of this yet, but really yearning, what is my place? Why am I here? Why have I taken birth? Is it a big random mistake? Or is there some greater reason, some mysterious reason why I'm here? And long story short, and I do love to share stories, but I didn't find the outwardly, the answers that I was looking for on the Navajo reservation. And yet I did, because, what I found was that I was able to work my way into the hearts of these people that, of course, generationally and from an ancestral connection, there was a huge gap between my ancestors, white of white European descent, and their ancestors being the First Nations people of this country. And I'd managed over the course of a few years to break through that and actually make a heartfelt connection. And so that was a huge reflection for myself, my own learning journey. And it was after that that a buddy from college had sent me a book about another, actually, Apache indigenous healer and a medicine man. And he spoke about vision, and he's in this book, and he spoke about the power of the vision quest and this notion that, yes, each human being has been born with a vision. And the great adventure of life is discovering what is that, and then working to unfold that, to manifest that in this life. And he talked about the old process of the vision quest, sitting and holding an intention for 4 days, 96 hours in the wilderness, fasting, holding this intention. Why am I here? Right? Taking this ceremony as a tangible expression of one's commitment, one's sincerity, and shedding all the distractions of the modern world, immersing oneself in nature, and entering into the spiritual world, the liminal world, the imaginal world. And indeed, that process that is, while many people associate it with Native Americans, and it certainly is strong in Native American culture, it's actually a very universal one. And all old cultures throughout history, all around the world, have practiced some form of this, right?
Right.
Jesus 40 days in the desert, Muhammad in the cave,
Right.
Moses on the mountain, Buddha being enlightened under a tree, not
Right.
in an ashram on a meditation cushion, under a tree. And so it worked, and I was able to see a vision for my own, and be touched by the power of my own soul, and see that I was being called to connect people to nature, to help people connect to their soul, to help people on the journey of healing and holing. And these three primary awakenings that we've been talking about. And I even saw that, I was going to get married and become a father and build community, all kinds of stuff. And through that process, Bart, that began, I mean, really that launched my soul's life. And I was lucky and blessed to have that happen early on in my adult life. I was 22 when that started. And so 46 now, it's been 24 years. And through it all, the indigenous elders and teachers have been hugely, hugely, hugely impactful. I mean, and that statement is a real understatement. Like I would not be here speaking to you, doing what I'm doing, were it not for my indigenous teachers through the years. And in many ways, they saved me. As I spoke about in our last interview, I had really low self-esteem at that point in my life, a lot of unhealed trauma. I needed a lot of help. And yet I was able to receive that and really transform all of that in service to this bigger vision. And, it hasn't been easy along the way, but I have consistently maintained my commitment to that. And that has been my North Star, my guiding light throughout.
So in a way, what I'm gathering, what you're saying and sharing with us, Tim, in regards to, finding our soul awakening, is really taking the time. And it's not just a few minutes. It's not just an hour meditation every day, but truly is, hearing the inner whispers in your mind
Yeah.
as to what is really important to you in this world. And and I love what you shared with you, in service.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to take that into context, because one of the ways that we feel most fulfilled is when we get to contribute beyond ourselves, when we get to
Yeah.
make a difference for other people. And I actually discovered that specific essence in myself and was able to verbalize it about 5, 6 years ago,
Yeah.
when I recognized that my emotional currency, and you're more than welcome to use that term, by the way, my emotional currency is to see somebody else succeed.
Yes.
And I particularly would see, these incredible Olympian athletes do these
Mm.
most incredible, impossible tasks and then succeed. And I would find myself crying, like,
Yeah.
wow, that
Yeah.
is amazing. And those are
Yeah.
tears of joy, recognizing, the other part that we share was, our own innate potential. And as we've been talking about, when we're playing small, because of all the extraneous information and morals and obligations and whatever's that dictate how we need to behave, all that external noise, in particular in this day and age, is even more intense than
Yes.
ever before.
Yeah. Big time.
And then just taking that time and 4 days at least
Yeah.
to just listen to that. And this is what some of the most incredible luminaries for our planet over eons, like Buddha, like Jesus Christ. I mean, they did that, and they did that
Yes.
to a level that you're now helping others do the same.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's so important to recognize in this modern world. I mean, 2020, here we are. The journey we have to go from everyday waking consciousness with 5,000 Facebook alerts on my phone every 5 minutes, and there's always right. We look at the internet; it's just vying for our attention, right? Vying, and there's teams of well-paid engineers figuring out better and better ways to grab our attention. It becomes increasingly more and more important for us to slow down. And so the journey, in some ways, it's harder for us in this day and age to make the journey from average everyday waking consciousness to really quieting the mind down and immersing in nature. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that the further away we get, and this is a firm belief I have, and I've really found this to be the case these last 6 months or so or more, 9 months now, just about since COVID hit, um, is that the call to soul seems to be louder. And what I mean by that, Bart, is I'm finding, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I'm finding more and more people are less and less satisfied with the mainstream life that
Yeah.
mainstream society puts out for us. And more people are saying, there is something else. They're feeling that displacement. I would offer, maybe not conscious of this, but they're feeling a displacement from their soul. They're feeling this sense that there's a calling, this knowing that there's something more to my life, this yearning uh, for that great sense of service, right? And by definition, like I said, soul is not ego. It's the ego that wants to focus on self and bettering oneself and always getting better and, oh, look at me. The soul doesn't care about that. The soul wants us to grow. The soul wants to push our edge. With those synchronicities and what I was talking about, I think there's another phrase I like to think of. Soul is both terrifying and irresistible all at the same time. So those things that just magnetically draw us and yet scare the crap out of us because we know we've got to step it up and step out of our smallness, that lead to service, right? That's the other point. By definition, a true purpose is a purpose beyond self, right? And as you're speaking to, Bart, in that level of service, when we can know that I made a difference in someone else's life and they succeeded in part because of my support, man, there is nothing like that. That's my juice, that's what we live for. And I think that's what we all live for. And so to be oriented, to care about the earth, to care about children, about future generations, about others, this is what's needed so much in our world today. Yeah, very exciting topic here.
And it's fun. It's fun taking care of nature. It's fun
Yes,
taking care of other people because again, the focus isn't on yourself, and you know all suffering comes because you focus entirely on yourself and nothing else. And so that's one of the ways that we can get ourselves out of it.
that's right.
And part of the series, by the way, of Prescription for Your Transformation series is, and the work that I'm doing is what I call tapping into the collective wisdom and creating the space of generative collaboration. And so it's recognizing that all of this diversity out here on the planet is something that we want to welcome and experience how we can work all of that together in support of creating a better planet for all of us, rather than knocking down what other people are doing or what's wrong with them. It's the whole concept of yes and versus yes
That's right.
but or no but. It's everything is yes and that's just taking the time that we rarely allow ourselves to take
Hmm.
because of all that clickbait out there. Like you said, all
Oh
these
yeah.
amazing engineers are out there for their own personal agendas. And what I love about the opportunity of obstacles, is that it gives us a time to reflect. And however you want to view and contextualize this COVID pandemic, it's as you said, it's required us to stop because in my opinion, we were on a crash course to fall over the cliff,
Oh yeah.
with everything that's been happening, and how we are consumed by all the external stuff, and that would have been catastrophic for all of us.
Yeah.
And so, in essence, I hate to say this, there's unfortunately, victims, true victims in this, but as a planet, I think there's an opportunity to heal. And we've seen, how animals, have gravitated back to nature and in the ocean because of the lack of pollution and all these things. So anyhow, I like to wrap it up with you.
Yeah.
So just if you can summarize for people so that they can go home with this final essence of awakening of the soul, what would you share with them?
Yeah, great. So again, yeah, to recap and summarize, there is a purpose for each unique individual human being. And that's true across the board, especially those people out there who might be wondering right now, oh, that's true for everyone else, but not me. No way. Each human being, you who are listening right now, have a unique purpose, a vision, a soul. And it is entirely possible to live for the natural world and yearn to make a difference. Getting support, finding a mentor that you connect with, that you trust. We're not meant to lone processes that still work today. And I love what you said on the opportunity of your obstacle. I always like the idea, the question of what is the gift in this moment, especially those difficult moments, rather than taking the victim stance of, oh, why is this happening to me? Right? It's this question of why is this happening for me? How is this an opportunity? It may be uncomfortable, it may be difficult, but there is something calling me forward here. There's an opportunity for me to grow. And if I can claim that and get behind that with the right mindset, get some support, then indeed we find that the whole world, the whole universe is truly conspiring for our growth. And that's a beautiful thing. That is an absolutely beautiful thing.
I love your words. I love your wisdom, and I appreciate you presenting this wisdom from the ancients. And my experience, with indigenous wisdoms is that they're recognizing that this is now the time to bring back those ancient wisdoms to the forefront that's been hidden
Yes.
for so long because we all need it. And you are able to put it in a format that we can then relate to and then implement. And so I honor you for that.
Mm.
And so, last question for you, Tim, how do people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say one other thing you made me think of. That I would agree with you. The time we're in now with COVID, with the political unrest, with the environmental turmoil, I really believe this is a collective rite of passage for us as humanity. What's the opportunity here? What's the gift here? It's to slow down and really see that the way we've been living has not been working on a deep level, and there's something else calling us forward. And to be able to yield to that, to surrender to that, to take what personal responsibility we can and step into our purpose, get the support we need. That's the opportunity. So yes, if people are interested, they can find me at Purpose Mountain online. It's just www.purposemountain.com. Got some free resources and links on there for people to check out. And if they're interested, they can connect further with me. I love working one-on-one and doing group work with folks.
So let's talk about ecological awakening. And I just want to bring a little story, for you because I've had a very blessed life,
Mm.
and all those traumas that I had growing up were nothing like some other people's traumas, but I know that I had my own traumas as well. And so we've been talking about, finding our wholeness and overcoming or resolving or coming to terms, with these traumas. And one of the ways that I was able to do that, growing up in Mexico, moved there when I was
Mm.
6 years old, joined the Boy Scouts, and was so blessed with all the nature that was around us. And so all
Mhm.
the time I went camping, stayed out for days, sometimes weeks, and really getting in touch with nature and finding my wholeness in that process as well. And just having that opportunity with my immature brain at the time,
Mm.
Actually, still think it's kind of immature, by the way. And it's really just feeling the essence of nature, and it's that relationship that I've honored for all these years.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, because I got caught up in the rat race of life and all these obligations and studying, I went to medical school when I was 17. Kind of put that aside. But every time I go back to nature, it's that reconnection of what is so vitally important that many of us do forget to do.
Mm.
And so I'd like to hear your brilliance, your
Mm.
intelligence on this ecological awakening, because the truth is that when it comes to our own well-being, we need a lot more nature in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely, Bart. Absolutely. So, I've been a wilderness guide for the last, well, since 1999. So, what is that? Just over 20 years now, professionally. And so, a major, major portion of my adult life's work has been connecting others to nature. In my own life, what I found, and we've spoken about this in some of the other interviews, was that as I faced the difficulties of childhood, I mean, I had a lot of great things as a kid as well, growing up in the 80s in the Midwest, being a Midwestern boy, loving family, beautiful, beautiful blessings in a lot of ways. But I had some difficulties too. So there was some abuse in there, there was bullying. Parents got divorced when I was a teenager. And in those moments of facing the difficulties, I would always retreat to the natural world, right? Whether it was the woods behind my house or at school, it was consistently a safe place for me to go. And what I didn't realize at the time, it was a place for me to release the difficulties of what was happening, right? Now, so nature can support our journey to wholeness or our healing journey in that way. But as well, and I've always been one who's been particularly, I think, spiritually oriented, or like as a kid, I always remembering contemplating the great mysteries of life. Why am I here? What is this whole thing about? And nature immersing ourselves in nature supports our understanding of our individual nature, of our true nature in the cosmos. So, it's this trio of awakenings we've been talking about. The connection, the ecological awakening, the connection to nature supports our healing journey, our journey to wholeness, and it supports our visionary development. Certainly, indigenous communities throughout history have recognized this. I would offer that a, a healthy connection to nature, like fully awakening the ecological connection, is developmentally necessary for us as human beings to fully actualize ourselves and fully experience our fullness, our wholeness, our visions in this life. If we think about it, even historically, Bart, I mean, human beings have lived on planet Earth for what, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, depending on your definition of what exactly is a human being. But certainly, this modern experiment of living in buildings and cars and never setting foot out into the natural world, or very rarely, it's just a blip. It's like less than 0.1% of our history on planet Earth have we lived in this modern way. And we're seeing in the past 100 or 200 years how many struggles that we face. The destruction of the natural world being, of course, right there at the top, but the destruction of our inner ecology, the destruction of the ecology of our families, the destruction of the ecology of our communities. Um, all of this is reflective of our relationship with nature. And so when we bring that on board, I mean, again, I would argue that it's as important as clean air to breathe, eating good food, having a loving family, drinking clean water. Yes, having a relationship with the planet that you live on that's not mediated by houses, cars, all of these things.
Right.
And consistently, what I've found, for years and years, I do run my organization Purpose Mountain, where I help people connect with purpose. But I have a second organization that's actually older, and that's Twin Eagles Wilderness School, where the explicit mission at Twin Eagles is to just connect people to nature. And we've been doing that for years and years. My wife and I founded Twin Eagles in 2005, so that's what, 15 years. And we work with kids and teens and adults. And consistently, Bart, what I found through the years is that as individuals make this deep connection to the natural world, right? It's like a calling people feel when you slow down, right? Maybe some of our listeners might even be feeling this now. This calling that, the wild places are almost magnetically drawing me out there. And it typically comes with a bit of fear, right? Like, gosh, can I make it out there, especially if there's not a lot of connection or trust. Um, but when people make this deep connection, unmediated, right? I'm not talking so much about hiking and kayaking and rock climbing. I'm more talking about the work I do classically has been the old skills. So I guide people in wilderness survival training and learning edible medicinal plants, wildlife tracking, learning the language of the forest, the birds, all these nature awareness practices. And and again, that's some old work. And so what I found through the years, Bart, is when people make that connection, really experience themselves as part of nature, which we are, right? That the purpose and vision and the connection to soul naturally emerges from that place, as does a greater motivation and yearning to take that the awakening of wholing, to heal themselves. Because what we realize is, as my awareness of the outer world increases, there's a natural awareness of my inner world that organically responds, that opens up. And so I realize, gosh, um, I'm not at peace with these certain experiences of my life, and I'm more sensitive to this other yearning, this yearning to serve, this yearning of to express, discover and express my purpose. All of these are interrelated. The other point I would offer is I love studying indigenous cultures. I've been very blessed to work with a number of indigenous elders and teachers throughout my adult life, and continue to. Um, if we look at indigenous language for a moment, which is fascinating to me, one of the things have found is that I've yet to find an indigenous language that has a word for nature. And I always found this so strange at first. I was like, well, wait a minute, these are indigenous peoples that are immersing in nature. Why wouldn't they have a word for it? And of course, the reason is because there is no perception of separation. We might even argue that the concept of nature, the term, the idea of it, is actually a part of the problem, right? To consider that, because people come up to me all the time, right? Oh, Tim, I can't wait to come out with you and get back to nature, And on the one hand, it's like, well, that there's something wrong with that idea. Like, everything is nature. I mean, this computer I'm staring at is nature. The house, the car, it's all nature. The issue is that we've mangled it and modified it and transformed it and separated ourselves from the natural cycle. But this idea that with indigenous language there is no notion of nature because we are nature, that's an important one, And so to find the courage, to heed the call, to connect with nature, um, there's the science has all been, the studies have all been done. It's good for our physical health. We know this. It's good for our emotional health. We know this. It facilitates bonding and relationships. We know this. Think of the best times you've had with loved ones, oftentimes happen in the natural world. It facilitates the healing journey, the journey of holing, and the journey of awakening to our vision. So I can't, I mean, it's all positive, it's all positive. It brings us to that sense of being fully alive, right? That we all yearn for. Um, so those are a few thoughts on it. Yeah, I'll pause there though for now.
No, I love what you're sharing because it's helpful for us to remember, the truth of what's already there and not using that word, of course, right? And it's not fabricated. And we
Yeah.
live in such a fabricated world that actually creates, honestly, a lot of potential dissonance within us. I
Yeah.
mean, just think, whatever building you're in, all the potential toxins that is, permeating through your body.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we are nature. It is one and the same. And when we are able to go outside of the fabricated world,
Mm.
right? So what I guess it's called the default world, or I forget which one it is. But the whole idea of when you're out there and it's your connection with what just is,
Mm.
and that gives us that opportunity to see what is within us,
Yeah.
as long as you're not distracted with your head, like, okay, what's my next movie that I'm going to watch when you're out there walking the terrain. And so it's also important because it gives us that opportunity to really respect out what is there and what's been
Mhm.
there for a long time. And in essence, it is what we're made of. I mean,
Mhm.
all the minerals and things that are out there, that's is also the construct of our own physical body, not our soul, but our physical body. So we are nature, and so it allows us to pause, like you say, and it is important, and it is scientifically proven, how important it is to go out there, and I'll use the word in nature, and
Yes.
just being with that. And so I'm very envious of you, that you are a wilderness guide, because it's one of the things that I've been just caught up with all the external stuff that I haven't allowed myself to do. And I keep on promising myself, I got to
Mhm.
find a guide, got to go out there, got to go to Montana, Utah, whatever,
Yeah,
or you're in Idaho, right?
that's right. Yeah.
And so I'm very much drawn to that, and I agree with you. I think all of us are drawn to that, and it would behoove us
Mhm.
to really embark on that. Just taking that time and finding that fulfillment within us, because we're accepting the world around us as natural. That's the word I want. As
Yeah.
natural. I mean, everything
Yes.
that's fabricated is not natural. So as natural,
Yeah.
and so that gives us that connection that's natural within us.
Yeah, and it's so important for us to recognize, Bart, that I know how much suffering there is in the world, and I experience that myself. And what's so key, and frankly, I mean, they say we teach what we need to learn, right? And so I'm in need of this as much as anyone else. But when I put in a day or two or a week or more on the computer, and I'm just running from one place to the next, and I've got that busy mind that seems to just overtake things, and maybe there's a struggle at home or in my relationships. This is part of the modern experience, and it's so easy to forget that there is help available to us. And this very simple step of slowing down, immersing ourselves in some natural place, and it doesn't have to be the Alaskan wilderness. Maybe it's just a local park or a state park or something. But when we do this, there are again physical, emotional, mental, spiritual processes that unfold that are there to help us, and that can ease our suffering. Um, I'm a big believer. I'm sure you're familiar with attachment theory, right? And that the bond that a baby makes with their parents, and particularly its mother, will affect its entire life's path,
Right.
one's entire life path. And yes, we can make changes to that, but this is, the bond between baby, child, and mother is massive in terms of the influence on the human life. And I would offer that there is an equally important attachment to the earth
Mhm.
that is as essential. And it's not about comparing more or less, but consistently over 20 years of facilitating this connection, what I find is it supports people in all of these areas that we're talking about, that there is a developmental need for us as humans that has largely been forgotten here in the modern world. And importantly, the best way to learn that is by modeling off of someone who's walking with that, right? I haven't cultivated this connection on my own in isolation with just me in the natural world. It's been with mentors,
Right.
right? This idea that awareness follows intention. There's lots of people out there who are, big hikers or whatever, kayakers or what have you, kind of the modern experience of the natural world, that miss out on so many of the healing properties and the visionary developmental properties that nature has to offer, because they're constantly in the logical mind that's getting from point A to point B. And there's not really the slowing down and the connecting with vulnerability and the opening up and the surrendering that's needed. And that can be scary, or it can just be foreign, or can be out of, as you were mentioning, out of one's consciousness. So to have mentors to guide that journey of deeply connecting with the natural world is critical. Yeah, absolutely.
And you have programs that offer that.
We do, yeah, yeah. That's my wife and I have been, as I said, running our wilderness school here in Idaho, Sandpoint, Idaho, for 15 years. That's Twin Eagles Wilderness School. People can find us online. It's just www.twineagles.org. We do all kinds of good stuff, Bart. I just ran a couple of weeks ago before seeing you. I ran a big father-son wilderness program where I took
Big,
dads and their boys
right.
into the woods and taught them first, 3-4 days of training where they were learning, how to make fire by rubbing sticks together and building natural shelters out of sticks and leaves that could actually keep them warm and dry in a rainstorm, learning edible plants they could actually eat, this kind of thing. And then that all built up to the big challenge, the final night. We left base camp. Base camp was like, you imagine, like a half dozen teepees and an outdoor kitchen and meals being cooked for them. Final night, right? We leave and we leave it all behind. And we just take a few essential pieces of gear, some emergency stuff. And they were tasked as a father-son pair to go out and build the shelter and make the fire, rub the sticks together, and find wild food. They found a big patch of chanterelle mushrooms, which are like amazing gourmet mushrooms, and feast, and experience the beauty and the security that and the knowledge, the self-sufficiency, and the connection that comes from that journey. And guess what? Their relationship, their bond was so incredibly renewed. I mean, by the end of this experience, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Their connection to nature had been awakened, and their sense of inner security, like, no, I'm not saying we have to go back to the Stone Age, but to know that, I can take care of my needs. I could go out there if I needed to and meet my needs and my family's needs. I could take care of us, and we wouldn't die. We wouldn't perish out there. That's a big deal. That does something to the psyche and to how we show up in the world. So that's one example. But man, we've got all kinds of stuff. We've got adult programs and summer camps for kids. I'm big into rites of passage, wilderness-based rites of passage, facilitating those. My wife runs mother-daughter programs and girls programs, and I do the father-son and the boys programs, and there's a lot there. So yeah, a lot of really fun stuff.
Sign me up. I'm there already. I've got the two adult boys and one
Oh,
adult
nice,
girl,
man.
and would love to do something similar with my girl as well.
Yeah,
So I think this is amazing. I think this is such a beautiful, magical gift that you offer people, and I'm so excited to have had this interview with you
mm,
to illustrate what's out there, and that's the whole purpose of this program, is really to have people get more awareness of what they can do for themselves to really
yeah,
transform themselves and have the fulfillment that we all desire. So Tim, thank you so much once again,
yes,
and I'd like
you
to give
bet.
you the last word.
Absolutely. So, well, in closing here, I did a ceremony a couple of weeks ago. It was actually down in Sedona, and this phrase, it was like a mantra of sorts, came to me, right? And the phrase is, "We are of this earth, and it matters." Right? We are of this earth, and it matters. And so my encouragement is to help awaken that. I think we all feel a certain calling deep within to make that connection. We all know what it feels like. We feel better on so many levels when we connect with nature. So tune into that. To the listeners, tune into that. Feel for that. Be willing to take a new action, to try that out. Maybe spend a little bit more time immersing in nature. Maybe find a guide, myself or someone else, who can facilitate that deeper connection, and trust that that is some level of there is some level of goodness there for you and your path, and that will help support you on your journey, and your family and your community, and ultimately in leaving this world a better place for this and future generations.
I love it, Tim. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And we will talk some more in the future for sure. And
great.
hopefully, interviewing out there in Twin Eagles, um, and with my transformation. So, once again, I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker. This is Prescription for Your Transformation. Real people, real conversations, real success. Talking to Tim Corcoran, from Purpose Mountain. and you're going to want to reach out to him and experience the magic that you deserve. So thank you, and I'll be back.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Rademaker's Prescription for Your Transformation. Continue the path towards discovering your own authentic genius by tuning